Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining today's webinar, facilitated by Hunter New England Central Coast Primary Health Network and presented by New South Wales Rural Doctors Network. Today's session is on employing an international medical graduate. My name is Charles Broadfoot and I am a Professional Development Officer with the PHN. I'd firstly like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands in which we're all meeting on today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Today's session is being recorded and the recording will become available on our webpage from tomorrow. So the slides will also become available. So to access the recording and the slides, just head to the PHN homepage and click on the Education tab. We will be accepting questions in today's webinar, so please type your questions into the chat box in the control panel. We have allocated time after the main presentation to go through these. At the end of the webinar, you'll see an evaluation survey automatically pop up. If you could just take a moment to fill that out, we really appreciate your feedback. So we are joined today by RDN staff Chris Anderson and Jessica Ewan. So Chris Anderson will be presenting today, and he is a recruitment service manager who joined New South Wales Rural Doctors Network around 2 years ago. So Chris has more than 14 years experience in agency recruitment industry and spent a number of years in China recruiting international teachers. So that's all from me. Thanks again for joining us, and I'll hand over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Charles. Welcome everyone. Hope you're all doing well and life's getting back to normal to some extent for everyone. I just wanted to introduce quickly Jessica Ewan, who has recently joined our team. Jessica will be taking over the New England region of Hunter New England Central Coast PHN. So she will be the support person for your practice if you're in that region, and Jessica will be transitioning into that role over the next month or so. So feel free to still contact myself regarding the region, but we will be transitioning Jessica across as well. So hope you can share welcoming Jessica to the team.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. I just wanted to say hi, everyone, and I look forward to working with everyone over the next couple of weeks and introducing myself to the team. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. I know Jessica has to run now because she has another appointment, so she'll be jumping out now, but I'll be here through the session and happy to answer your questions towards the end. Thanks heaps, Jessica. Okay, so welcome to the presentation of employing an IMG. We're going to try and keep things as easy as we can and as quick as we can for you. Want to try and allocate about 10 minutes or so towards the end for your questions. I expect that you may have some and certainly encourage you to ask those questions that you've always wanted to ask. So up now, I'd just like to move on to the next slide and start talking to you about, sorry, I've got a little technical issue, there we go. Quickly, just a quick overview of New South Wales Rural Doctors Network and what we do. I'm not going to read this all, but you can see there, and you will receive a copy of the presentation afterwards as well. Our purpose primarily is to help improve health access for people all across New South Wales and the ACT. And you can see our goals there as well. I've highlighted a few things in red there to really sort of cement to you what our main aims are as an organisation. A couple of things that RDN have as support offerings that I thought were relevant to mention to you as well. If you haven't already joined Rural Health Pro, RDN created this over 12 months ago as a network for health sector, for the whole health sector basically, to deliver focused content to you. So you can join. It's kind of like a LinkedIn for the health sector. So if you're not aware, you can join. I've got a link there in this presentation to assist you with that. You can basically tell us what you want to know and what you'd like to be made aware of, and we curate that for you from about 100 or so different organisations. And then we also have Rural Health Together, which is a support website. It's kind of a self-care type of website. It gives lots of information about accessing mental health provisions and assistance, and also has information there not just for the workforce, but also for patients as well to assist you if you are a practitioner. We also have a rural health training calendar, which covers off a variety of rural training events, and again, they're curated from multiple organisations. So we encourage you to use that as well. It shows what's going on in your region on a particular day, and you can look quite ahead in time as well for that one. I've also put in there our recruitment team email address. So if you ever have any questions whether it's following this presentation or in general about recruitment support that we could offer, you're welcome to email us on that email address. And there's also a number of resources we're continuing to build and make more available as time goes on from our recruitment and retention teams. So there's a link there as well for you to look at those on our website. And RDN's funding is to support rural practices in MMM 2 to 7, and also Aboriginal controlled health services as well, right across the state. So for Aboriginal controlled health services, we also support them in metropolitan areas. So moving on to the good stuff, hopefully what you're here for particularly. As I said, I've tried to keep this relatively simple, but also providing you with enough information to help you for those times where you might receive a CV from an international doctor and aren't sure of what the process might be for them, whether there's someone that would fit with the capacity that your practice has. So hopefully this will give you that overview. So all IMGs, international medical graduates, are subject to a couple of parts of the Health Act, one being 19AA, also all other doctors are subject to this as well, local doctors as well. But for the instance of international medical graduates, they all need to join a 3GA program if they're not fellowed, and that's so that they can get a provider number if they're a citizen or a permanent resident. So basically the government says, if you're a permanent resident or a citizen of Australia, you must join a 3GA program to get your provider number if you haven't gained your fellowship. So the idea of that is by joining a 3GA program, it helps to move them along and push them along into gaining fellowship. Any temp res doctors though, they do not need to join a 3GA program and they can apply direct to Medicare for a provider number. So in some cases, you may find that you'll have an applicant, and a lot of international doctors who are looking for their very first position are likely to be a temporary resident. In that case, they don't actually need to join the 3GA program and can apply direct to Medicare. If you're unsure, obviously come to us and we can help with clarity on that as well. The next component of the Health Act that they're all subject to is 19AB. Now that is basically the moratorium. You might have heard that wording before, that language before. So all IMGs are subject to the 10-year moratorium. That means that they must work in a location that is DPA. I've put a link there so that you can check. Most people, I'm sure, would know the DPA status of their location, but if you don't, you can click that link there and go through the process for the system to tell you whether you are DPA or not. So basically, all IMGs have to work in a DPA location. There are very few exceptions or exemptions available. One of those is only for temporary residents, and it is in the case where your location may be not DPA, however, you've had an international medical graduate, an IMG, leave your practice in the previous 12 months and have closed their provider number and have said that they will not be returning to the area that the DPA is calculated in. In that case, as a temporary resident, they may be able to use a replacement exemption. So it is only available to temporary residents. It's not available to citizens or permanent residents because they have that condition of 19AA where they need to join a 3GA program. And in that case, 3GA programs dictate that the location has to be DPA. So if you're non-DPA, that's really the only option for you to get an international doctor. Again, if you need to talk more about that, ask some questions at the end, or you can easily contact me to discuss that as well. Now, one of the 3GA programs is MD-RAP, and some of you, maybe a lot of you, have some experience with us with that. RDN administer MD-RAP. for the department in New South Wales. So that one, that program, it's not a training program, so it is a program aimed purely at gaining access to a provider number, and it's typically aimed for less experienced GPs, and the aim is that they get experience as a GP and then they jump onto a training program, so they're not sort of behind the 8 ball straight away. They're not just new to Australia, first position, and all of a sudden launched into an intensive training program and don't really get time to settle in. So MD-RAP gives them up to 2 years to access to a provider number and up to 2 years to join a training program. Supervision, this is probably a part that we get lots and lots of questions about when you consider employing an IMG. So typically, most IMGs applying for registration are likely to need level 1 supervision for at least 6 months. Now, this is determined by AHPRA at the time when they apply for their registration. And the supervisor must be a fellow GP that's working at the practice. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the levels of supervision, there's a link there for you. So you can look at those. There are 4 different levels of supervision designated by AHPRA. The level 1 supervision is the most intense, and just to sum it up in my own language, so please check the link to make sure you look at the exact detail and language, but basically the supervising doctor needs to understand the situation, the consultation with each patient that the IMG sees before the patient leaves the premises. So in effect, the supervising doctor must be available to understand, tick off and say, yes, I'm happy with what you've come to as your point at the end of the consultation and what the next steps are for that patient. I'm comfortable with that, or no, I'm not comfortable with it. You need to consider these things as well, and then get back to me. So it does put quite a lot of extra pressure time on the supervisor. However, it can be a very good solution as well for workforce issues. And while it is quite intensive, the supervision for the first 6 months, and it can be longer sometimes. We do see AHPRA sometimes award level 1 supervision for 12 months, which then is a long period of time for that high intensity of supervision. However, generally then after that, as the IMG moves up the supervision levels, it's much less onerous on the supervisor, and it can be a very good way still to build your workforce. There's a bit of short to medium term pain for hopefully that medium to longer term gain. There's also, just to assist with this as well, and I don't have a lot of details at the moment because we are still currently working on it, but we are working on an MD-RAP supervision and training program, which will provide funding for IMGs who are under supervision to assist the practice with the costs, and it also can assist the doctor as well, the GP, with training costs and training funds, that sort of thing. So we haven't got all the final details of that flushed out. It's a national program which is being coordinated by one of the other states. So it's being coordinated by Queensland. So we're working with them and the other states at the moment to finalise the details. But we believe and understand that it will be quite a well-funded program. So it may be the sort of thing that will assist a lot of practices who in the past have maybe balked at the supervision of level 1 because it takes their fellow doctor away from seeing patients. Potentially, the doctor might not see 30 patients a day. They might only be able to see 20 because of needing to check in with the IMG's patients as well before they leave. So this may assist from the financial side of things to help with that, and other costs as well. So we'll look forward to revealing more to you as things are finalised, and RDN typically have lots of those types of applicants available as well. We understand that a lot of practices are not able to support that level of supervision, but for those who can and can see the benefit from the financial funding that is likely to come very soon, it may help you out, and we're likely to have a good number of candidates that we can then start recommending to you as well that require that supervision. And then just looking outside of that though, so other IMGs, there are 5 countries, so the UK, USA, Canada, New Zealand and Ireland. Those applicants are likely to be able to come in on what's called the competent authority pathway. They may not need to sit a pesky, and they have typically less supervision requirements as well, depending on their experience overseas. So you can gather probably by the name of that pathway, the competent authority pathway, those 5 countries have been recognised by the medical board as having a very similar system to Australia, so they tend to be able to adapt much easier, sooner, and have experience that's very comparable to what happens in a GP practice here in Australia. And particularly if they have fellowship. So as an example, I'm working at the moment with a fellow doctor in New Zealand. He has found a practice that he wants to come across and work with in New South Wales. He had his fellowship, as I said, over there. He had to go through the process of applying for his fellowship recognition. AHPRA then awarded him with, he needs to do 6 months of practice with a level of supervision, nothing like level 1, with a fellow GP that they recognise and have approved. And then after that 6 months, a report is written by both the applicant and the supervisor, and if all's well, he would then be awarded his Australian fellowship as well. So yes, those 5 countries are our ultimate. They are still difficult to access, particularly the UK at the moment, because of, we all know what they're going through, and the US as well, and Canada, Ireland to an extent as well, what they're all facing with COVID at the moment. We're not seeing a lot of interest in GPs in those countries looking elsewhere at the moment. So yes, but they are 5 countries that if you do ever see an applicant from there, typically it will be a much simpler process for them to join you. Now, I've put together a flowchart for you. I'm very mindful of the time. Now, this flowchart, you'll see I've called it the simple flowchart. I have a more detailed version as well, which I'll also make available to you. But this one is one which I'm just going to change my screens here. This one I've tried to keep it as simple as possible to help you out. Now, hopefully, if I turn my camera off as well, hopefully you can see that okay. So basically, if you follow this flow chart, you can see here the applicant CV. You need to look at it and say, have they passed an AMC MCQ? If you don't know what that is, quick Google will show you, but it's the Australian Medical Council multiple choice question examination. So it's typically completed overseas by an IMG. They need to have passed that before they can progress anywhere at all. So if they haven't passed that, it's going to be quite some time for them to even be ready to start looking at a position. So they have that. Next is GP experience. Do they have GP experience? Yes or no? If they don't, you may not want to pursue it any further, because if they don't have any GP experience in their own country, anecdotal evidence tells us that they may have some trouble passing a pesky and then therefore gaining registration. It might be a really long process for them. In some cases though, the CV, there's some countries where it might look like they've just been working in a hospital, but you may be aware that certainly in some countries like Sri Lanka as an example, we see lots of GPs from there, and they do a lot of outpatient work from the hospital. So they are often regularly assessed and have a decent amount of GP experience as well. So I would be looking a little bit just beyond the word GP to see if you see outpatient and that sort of thing mentioned in their CVs. Next thing is, do they have a visa? Yes or no? If they don't, they will need some type of sponsorship, and they will need a health workforce certificate, which this HWC refers to. So as I said, I have a more detailed one, which I'll make available to you as well. But yes, they now have their visa. What do they have? Do they have a temporary or a permanent residency visa? So here we go. If we have a temporary resident, we follow this way. So I mentioned earlier that a temporary resident can apply direct to Medicare for their provider number. They obviously have to have their registration. as well, but yes, they can apply. And then RDN has some funding available for a site visit grant, which they'll need to apply for before coming to see you for a interview or to check out the practice, you know, that sort of thing. If they don't have their visa, then we know they have to go back over to here. If they're a permanent resident or a citizen, so they must join the 3GA program. So this is where you may want to contact RDN. You probably would actually, because they're likely to have to join our program of MDRAP. And then again, we can assist with site funding. The provider number is then issued once we lodge their application for MDRAP. And then we can also potentially further assist with a relocation grant. That does depend a little on the location of the practice though. Just jumping back across here, if they don't have their registration, so they've got through their visa, they've got a visa, but no registration, then obviously it's go back to the point of needing to apply for a visa. If they don't have a visa and it's going to take forever to do that, then that's something that you may consider as well, because it is a bit of a lengthy process sometimes. So registration, they don't have registration, then they're going to have to book a PESCI, and the PESCI providers in New South Wales are both the RACGP and ACRM. So no registration, must have a PESCI unless they happen to be one of those practices, that one of those countries, sorry, that we spoke about previously. And registration, following on from there, no. Then they must, once they've booked their PESCI and completed that, they'll move on to, ideally, they have a observership before completing the PESCI, so we recommend that they come to your practice for at least 2 to 3 weeks. There is some funding from RDN for that potentially as well, depending on the location. And the idea of that is that they get to know your practice, because the PESCI examination prior to registration is linked to your practice. So the people that are on the examining board will ask questions that relate to the demographics that they have of data from the billings for your practice. So it's important that they kind of get to know the scenarios of your patients. So for the PESCI is passed, yes, then they can apply for their registration. If the PESCI is not passed, you may consider that they will want to sit another PESCI again, and that would need to be booked, and the cycle basically starts again. So hopefully that's given you a quick overview. I know it's a lot of information, but you will get a copy of this, and I will make sure that I send you the more detailed flowchart as well, which has a bit more information and links and things like that included. I'm just going to change screens again quickly. We're almost done so that we can jump onto questions. So a little bit more information here in the presentation about MDRAP, and then a really important thing to make you aware of with some changes to the fellowship exam eligibility. All doctors who have not gained their fellowship by the 31st of December this year, they must be on a GP training program to continue sitting exams. So it's just something to be mindful of. There'll be quite a few doctors, I would say, that this may impact as things move along. A bit more information here about RDN's education and training programs and Rural Health Pro that I mentioned earlier. Quick view there of the home screen of somebody, and questions. Ready to go, Charles?
Great. Thanks, Chris. That was a great presentation. We have had a couple of questions come in. If anyone has any burning questions, please type them into the chat, and hopefully we can get to them before we finish up in about 5 minutes. So the first question that's come through, Chris, is, can you please talk more about the DPA process? How often is it calculated and how often is it reviewed?
Okay, yeah, that's a question that we get a fair bit as well. Thanks, Charles. DPA is reviewed every 12 months. If you're not aware, that's on the 1st of July each year. So we are getting closer to another review. we don't have a lot of information of the exact detail of how things are calculated, and we certainly don't get any update from the department prior to that 1st of July. So we all get on there as excitedly as a lot of practices are to check that out on the day, so on the 1st of July. But our understanding is that they review the billing data, obviously look at demographics, population, age, demographics, that sort of stuff as well. And they take into consideration other situations that they may have been made aware of during our publication of our needs assessment that we provide to the department, and updates on that twice a year. So yeah, that's pretty much sort of the overview of it. Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing what happens on the 1st of July, because I know there's a few areas that are not DPA that we would sort of have our fingers crossed in, them getting it back.
Yeah, great. We've got a question. Would like to know about the salary payment for level 1.
Okay, so the level 1 supervision for these IMGs, it's not the same as you may have experienced previously for like the registrar supervision level payments. So typically it's negotiated with the doctor. We would see that most practices tend to have a safety net that they would create for the IMG, because they're obviously not going to be seeing too many patients to start off with. Their billings are not going to be, all that high to start off with. So some may set, an hourly base rate as a minimum, and then if their billings go above that, they would then pay whichever is the higher. And so I wouldn't say there's a fixed answer to that. We see and hear practices paying percentage-wise for that level of doctor, somewhere in the 50 to 60% is typically what they would pay for that level of doctor. Hope that's answered that. If not, feel free to email me afterwards.
Yep. Another question, can you confirm that if they haven't passed the pesky, then they cannot obtain a provider number as no registration?
Yes, that's exactly right. So without passing the pesky, they cannot apply for registration. So only way for an IMG that must do that as part of their process. So if they're not from one of those 5 countries, then they have to pass the pesky.
Thank you. Another question, after the doctor passes the pesky, what kind of visa do they need to apply for, and what documents do the practice need to provide?
Yep, great. So it's a difficult one for us to give a lot of detail on. There's some fairly tight laws, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, on immigration laws. So we can't provide direct advice on that, but there's some good information available on the immigration website. But typically, they would most likely apply for a temporary skills shortage visa, as GP is one of the recognised positions for that. So typically that's the visa that they would be applying for, which is a 482 visa from memory. But prior to that, you would need to apply for a health workforce certificate. So this was introduced last year by the department, and basically it's the very first step to make sure that you can then actually apply for a visa. So it's to check on the initial sort of situation of how desperate is the area in need of doctors. So they do a calculation themselves on that. So it's called Health Workforce Certificate, and it's the Visas for GPs program. So that isn't administered by RDN at all. We provide some data to them when they get an application, but basically you apply for that online. They issue you with a certificate that says, yes, no problem, and you need to provide that certificate with the temporary visa application, along with some other documents as well.
Great, and there's just one last question. Is there a way of fast tracking sponsorship?
Unfortunately not. we get asked that a fair bit as well, and if there's anything that we can do at all. It's a bit like the provider number applications as well, or not a bit like it, it is like it, where they deal with them in order that they receive them. And yeah, there's no way that we're aware of that can speed things up like that. It's something certainly that's being raised a hell of a lot, and particularly in the New South Wales parliamentary inquiry into rural health at the moment, there's quite a lot of people raising that point that, you know, the time that it takes for all these things, and that flow chart that I showed you there, you know, each of those steps is anywhere from 2 to 3 months, you know, for each of those steps. So you're looking at 12 months, 18 months sometimes from when a IMG applies to you without registration to they can actually gain their registration. You know, so yeah, unfortunately there isn't. Sorry, that's the direct and honest answer.
Yeah, it's always a good question to ask, though, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
We do have a couple more questions, but we have come to the end of the webinar. As Chris mentioned, he would be happy to for you to contact him. So what we might do, Chris, if you're happy, I can send an email out to everyone who's registered, and I'll give them your contact so you can ask him, get in contact with him directly. And I'll also provide a copy of the slides and also that the workflow document that Chris went through as well. Does that sound okay, Chris?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. If you could give my direct email address instead of just that recruit one as well, I'm happy to deal with it direct, so then it doesn't go to the whole broad team and everyone's receiving the same email. I'd be happy to answer those and get back to you. It may take me just, you know, a couple of days to respond, but I'll respond to you as soon as I can. And I will also send Charles the more complex flow chart that I have together as well with a bit more information.
Great, thanks, Chris. That's really helpful. All right, so thanks everyone. Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate your time today, and thanks for sending in those great questions. Just a reminder that when we end the webinar, the evaluation survey will pop up. If you could take a moment to fill that out, we really appreciate your feedback. So thanks again, thanks, Chris, and we hope you have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks everyone for listening. Bye.
See you later.